I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, and this is Focus on Israel. The prophecy of a New Jerusalem is Ezekiel's prophetic vision of a wondrous city centered on the rebuilt Holy Temple in Jerusalem. In this edition of Focus on Israel, we'll explore the Jewish and Christian prophecies of the New Jerusalem. I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, president and founder of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and sharing the message of Christian biblical responsibility to the people and land of Israel against the rise of a global genocidal anti-Semitism. And at this critical time in history, we must turn our focus on Israel. The first prophecy of a New Jerusalem is recorded by Ezekiel and was received on Yom Kippur of the year 3372 of the Hebrew calendar. Within Ezekiel 40 through 48, there is an extended and detailed description of the measurements of the temple, its chambers, porticos, and walls. The New Jerusalem is further expounded upon in Isaiah. The city is described as a place free from terror and full of righteousness. Here, Isaiah provides an example of Jewish end times prophecy, where a hope for a perfected Jerusalem and freedom from oppression is revealed. Judaism sees the Messiah as a human male descendant of King David, who will be anointed as the King of Israel and sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem. He will gather in the lost tribes of Israel and rebuild the Holy Temple in Jerusalem according to the pattern shown to the prophet Ezekiel. During this time, Jews believe an era of global peace and prosperity will be initiated. The nations will love Israel and will abandon their gods, turn toward Jerusalem, and come to the Holy Temple to worship the one God of Israel. The surviving New Jerusalem text in Qumran literature focuses specifically on the 12 city gates and on the dimensions of the entire new city. To give us a better perspective of the Jewish tradition and prophecy of the New Jerusalem, we spoke with, of course, a rabbi.
Now, in the prophetic text of Ezekiel, the details are tremendously precise. This courtyard must be 100 cubits, and a cubit is from here to here. This gate has to be so high and so wide. This wall has to be 5 cubits. That wall has to be 6 cubits. There has to be this chamber and that. All very precise, but very hard to make a picture out of. But along comes this genius, Ramchal, in the 1700s, and applies his mind to these chapters of Ezekiel, and he comes out with 5 chapters in clear rabbinic Hebrew corresponding to the tractate Midot, the measurements of the Second Temple. And Ramchal, in his 5 chapters, sets forth a completely structurally sound explanation of the building and all of its precincts. Ramchal applied the laws and rules and insights of Gematria to explain the form of the prophecy of Ezekiel. And this he did in his essay, his discourse on the form of the temple, which he gave the name Mishkanei Elyon. Mishkanei Elyon is a phrase in Psalms which means the sanctuaries of the divine. And this is the foundation of the concept that the earthly temple, the temple of stone in Jerusalem, is actually parallel to the heavenly temple. They are aligned. What happens in the earthly temple is bound up with the workings of the heavenly temple. When there is no temple in Jerusalem. The world is in a state of destruction, and the heavenly temple also is not properly functioning and not sending blessing down into the world. So Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzato's explanation of the form of the temple as described in Ezekiel is an explanation of what is the inner meaning of the mathematical qualities of these courtyards and buildings. And all of this he explains through the science of gematria, which you cannot dispute because these are mathematical equations. And when you show that the divine names of the Torah, the various names of God, and the various description of the attributes of God are actually mathematical expressions, then you are beginning to penetrate mysteries which are intrinsically beyond our minds, but will show us how through a connection with the temple on earth in Jerusalem, we will be able to be in alignment to receive the blessings from the heavenly spiritual temple. In his work, Mishkanei Elyon, the sanctuaries of the Supreme, which is I've translated in full with an overview and some commentary in a work called The Secrets of the Future Temple, because the moment you understand that the dimensions of courtyards and walls and buildings are mathematical expressions that are not physical, but they are intellectual and spiritual, you see how the temple itself is the interface and the gateway between the physical world and the spiritual world. The future temple, as explained in Ezekiel, that it is all square. The outer courtyard is square. The inner courtyard is square around a building that is essentially a cube, 100 cubits tall, 100 cubits wide, and 100 cubits deep. A 100 cubit cube, what is the meaning of the square and the cube? The teaching is that you're entering in a place which is geometrically designed to inculcate into our hearts the concepts of balance and tolerance and cooperation between opposites. That is the lesson, because that is what the whole repair of the world requires. This is so simple and so important for the world we live in, where what we are witnessing is, as prophesied in Ezekiel and in Zechariah, of the days of the end of the end times, that one against his brother. Everybody's fighting each other. The beauty of the square is that everything is in a dynamic balance between right and left. Everybody functions within their allotted boundaries, and that way everything stays in balance. And that is why the city of Jerusalem is called Jerusalem, Yir'ah Shalem, or that is Shalem, that is whole where left and right acknowledge and interact, giver and receiver acknowledge and interact, and that is the key to Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzato's explanation of the future temple, the house whose glory will be above all of the other houses that were before, and which will bring peace to all of the world. We definitely see in our time a growing surge of interest in the Torah, in the prophets, and in the holy writings across the world. Now, why is this happening? What we are seeing is, I would say, the beginnings of another huge leap forward by humanity in the direction of God's ultimate will. As we tell our friends and our families, our brothers and sisters, this will grow and swell, and that is why the heavenly Jerusalem will come to dwell on earth in stages. So it comes from heaven, and it's built by man. But now this is going to be very surprising to some people who think that the present-day political geography of the Middle East is set in time, in stone, and can never be changed. It's only been here for less than a century still, and it's going to change radically. The concept of the temple coming down from heaven is not like a sort of almighty, coming down out of space and whamming into the Temple Mount. That would be truly horrendous, and I don't think that that is the meaning of the prophecy of the earthquake in Zechariah 14. I think the idea is that what comes down from God is what comes into the soul of people.
In the New Testament, the New Jerusalem is also titled Heavenly Jerusalem in the book of Revelation, as well as Zion in other books of the Christian Bible. In Christian end times doctrine, it is a city that will be established to the south of the Temple Mount and will be inhabited by the 12 tribes of Israel after the Messianic era, when Christ reigns over the saints. Since Christianity originated as a sect of Judaism, the history of Jewish places of worship and the currents of thought in ancient Judaism served in part as the basis for the development of the Christian conception of the New Jerusalem. Christians have always placed religious significance on Jerusalem as the site of the crucifixion and other events central to the Christian faith. To learn more about the Christian interpretation of the New Jerusalem, we turn to Janet Willis, author of the recent book, What on Earth is Heaven Like?
I was a pastor's wife for 17 years and had 9 children. 3 of them were grown and married and out of the home, and we had 6 younger ones I was homeschooling full-time. We had a car accident about 20 years ago where the gas tank exploded into the vehicle with my husband and I in the vehicle. And the only ones that got out were my husband and myself and our oldest boy, who was 13. And because of burns, he didn't make it through the night. So we lost all 6 children, ages 13 on down to 6 weeks in one day. And God's was tremendously, His grace was evident and powerful, and He comforted me through the Bible as I read His scriptures. But the greatest things were things about heaven and about Jerusalem, about the New Jerusalem, just jumping off the page at me. And I started keeping notes, keeping track of what I was learning. And after about 12 years, I thought, you know, instead of just reading through the Bible, I think I'd like to really delve into this and study it in a serious way. I know that I won't know what the New Jerusalem looks like until I see it with my own eyes. But I was amazed at how much Scripture talked about, specifically Jerusalem in the future, prophecies about Jerusalem that are still not fulfilled. One of the big ones that stood out to me was from the book of Ezekiel in chapters 40 to 48. And those 8 chapters, primarily Ezekiel spends time, his angel escort gives him a tour of the future temple. But at the very end of the book of Ezekiel, in chapter 48, he gives us the dimensions, and he says it was square at the base, 11 miles in each direction, and I'm taking the largest estimate. And the city had 3 gates on each side, named for the 12 tribes of Israel. And the name of the city from that day shall be, the Lord is there. That was ringing in my ears throughout this study. Now there's other scriptures as well. Jeremiah gives scriptures about size. Now we know Jerusalem's been destroyed and rebuilt, but when Jeremiah gave his prophecy, he's talking about size, locations. He's naming places specifically that a valley will be filled in. So the implication are that there's going to be topographical changes. Then Zechariah and many other prophets talk about those topographical changes that will happen sometime still future. So the size that Ezekiel's talking about could only fit if those topographical changes happen. So a lot of people would like to take Ezekiel and allegorize it and say it cannot be. But when you match it up with all the prophecies about the topographical changes, then of course God can do that. Then I looked at what John said about the New Jerusalem. He also had an angel escort. Both Ezekiel and John had an angel escort with a measuring rod. There's so many parallels that it's, even most Bibles will say in the cross-reference, they will link John's vision of the New Jerusalem. But most of us haven't been able to put the two together, primarily because of size. But John's angel escort also gave him measurements. He saw a city that had 3 gates on each side, named for the 12 tribes of Israel. It was square at the base. Of course, John's city, he talks about the height as well, whereas Ezekiel doesn't deal with that at all. When John gives the measurement, he says 12,000 stadia, that's in the Greek, and then he says the length, the width, and the height are equal. He follows that phrase right after the number. In Isaiah chapter 54, Isaiah chapter 60, he mentions things that match up with some of the things that John tells us about the New Jerusalem, the jewels and the many of the details, chapter 60 particularly. So we've all seen those parallels, but the size issue was, I think, the key, and to me it was the key that unlocked the whole puzzle. When John gave the size, and then John says the length, the width, and height are equal, I think that maybe John meant for us to take that as a cubed root. In other words, he was giving, just as Ezekiel gave the perimeter, John was giving the total measurement there. And he clues us in by saying the length, the width, and the height are equal, letting us know that there's 3 dimensions here to be considering. The cube root, it comes out to be 11 miles. That's the same as Ezekiel's measurement. They match up beautifully. The fact that the New Jerusalem is present during the millennium, there are many verses in the Old Testament that seem to indicate that, but because we all thought it was so huge, we figured maybe suspended, hovering over the earth during the millennium. But I'm saying I do feel pretty strongly that the scriptures are telling us that the New Jerusalem will descend at the beginning of the millennium. So when Christ comes back, he's bringing his house with him, and that will be our main dwelling place. I want to say also that I believe what God is going to do, he's going to do in his time, in his way. And he does tell us to pray, thy kingdom come. But there's really nothing that I believe we don't take up arms to try to make this happen, that type of thing. But I also want to include the fact that although Jerusalem will be located in Israel, and it's a promise from our Jewish Messiah, I think that the picture of the New Jerusalem that I would like to communicate is that there will be people in there from every tribe and people and nation. And it's a free and open invitation for us to trust in Christ and God's Messiah to have access to that city. You know, the city of Jerusalem is called the city of peace, and it's the most fought over piece of real estate on the planet. Jews and Christians and Muslims all claim to have a piece of that, a part of that. The visual aspects are a key piece of this whole thing, and I've attempted to make some illustrations of biblically based possibilities. When I say biblically based, I'm trying to base it on actual scriptures that I've found. Because I'm an artist, I was trying to say, okay, what does this look like? And the pyramidal shape not only became evident from scriptures in the Old Testament talking about God's holy mountain and the New Testament in Hebrews chapter 12, but also the fact that the New Jerusalem might have existed from the beginning. There's a verse in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 28, where God says that Satan, that he was in Eden and he was cast out of God's holy mountain. It even says in that passage. So the possibility, and I'm not dogmatic about this, but the possibility that Adam and even the people before the flood might have either seen or known about the New Jerusalem being a mountain shape is very powerful, because as soon as the flood was over, one of the first things that happened was a whole society decided that they were going to build a city and a tower that would reach to heaven. And then you see that echoed all over the world. Pyramids were built way more than I even realized. I mean, hundreds of thousands of different shapes, different sizes, but they're all pyramidal shapes. And they're all in relation to eternal hopes, dwelling place of the gods, and not having the written revelation from God, things get altered, but that's echoed round the world. I came up with an idea of the possibility of a city upon a city upon a city, similar to our skyscrapers today, only on a much larger scale. And I've even checked with scientists to see how that could possibly be. Of course, we know that God can do anything, but He gives us this extraordinary height that we, especially as an artist, have to deal with and try to figure out how could that be. When God says that there's 12 foundations, I portrayed it as 12 levels, not necessarily all equal. God doesn't tell us that they're equal. That's why I come up with the pyramid size, the pyramid shape, and all the verses throughout the Old Testament talk about God's holy mountain. And then you go to Hebrews chapter 12, and Mount Sinai is compared to the New Jerusalem directly. A number of verses that actually explain that. One mountain is a picture of another mountain. Ezekiel actually gives us the layout of the metropolitan area of Jerusalem, and that there's a place around the temple for the Levites and for the descendants of Zadok, priests that will be ministering in the temple. And then on either side of the city is a planting place, a place for growing crops. That's all spelled out in Ezekiel. Those are details that are given. There's a great prophecy in Isaiah about a canopy or a cloud cover at the top, which also is echoed in Mount Sinai. It specifically says that at night it will look like fire and by day it'll look like a cloud, which echoes the scriptures in Hebrews chapter 12, especially comparing the New Jerusalem specifically to Mount Sinai. The areas around in front of this structure, like a city, this pyramid shape, out in front will be the temple, separate from the city, just like John said, that there's no temple in the city. When John said there's no night there is no night there, he is actually, the actual content of what he's telling us is in the New Jerusalem there's no night, and there still could be night outside of the city. So I have a picture that I did like that to try to convey that idea. It's a city that never sleeps, and the Lord is the light there in the city. I believe the Bible is very clear that Jerusalem will be the capital of the world someday, with God's Messiah reigning from there. I think what many sometimes miss is the fact that there's an open invitation that anyone can have a part of that. But we know from Scripture that there will be battles over the city right up to the end. Great destruction is going to happen not only to Jerusalem but also to all the cities of the world. Great topographical changes. On the scale of the worldwide flood someday, there's going to be worldwide fire and destruction. It seems inevitable that there will be this battle over the city. We cannot avoid that. My focus is that when tough times come and we are undergoing persecution or great deprivation, having a focus of what is the long view will be one of the greatest helps. When Jesus went to the cross, it says, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. He had that long view. And I think that's important that we understand what the long view is. God gives us a chance to look through his telescope and see what that long view is. And I think it would help us get through those tough times that are coming up.
That's our show for today, and I want you to know we appreciate hearing from you. Please send your comments and questions to comments@pjtn.org. The time to take a stand is now. Be a leader in your community and in your church. One person can make a difference. Get involved with and support pro-Israel organizations such as PJTN. Call your senators, congressmen, the White House. Let your elected leaders hear from you. Visit our website to learn more, sign up to receive action alerts, and order our films to share with family and friends. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and all Israel. Please join us again when we focus on Israel. You just learned a portion of the truth about the world's most volatile region, the world's most demonized country, and the 2,000-year hatred of a people that have survived despite the odds. From studying history, it's very clear that what starts with the Jews never ends only with the Jews. We must strongly stand against any anti-Semitic trends, for if not stopped, they'll cause harm to all of us, and we'll witness the downfall of our Judeo-Christian Western culture. Today, many people say there's no longer a need for a Jewish state, that Jews around the world no longer need a place of refuge. But anyone who has heard recent statistics about the worldwide rise in anti-Semitism would never make such a claim. The reality is that neo-Nazi groups and Nazi sympathizers are increasing around the world. Surveys show that over 1 billion people in the world harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Close to 50% believe that Jews have too much power in the business world, and 2/3 of the world's population has never heard of the Holocaust or believe the historic accounts of it are inaccurate. Don't let yourself be manipulated by evil people with a wicked agenda. When the self-serving villains are in control, good people from all religions suffer. Muslims, Christians, and all people of conscience should stand proudly and show respect for a country that gives so much to the world in so many ways. Do your part. Do your research, and do what you can to make a difference. Because what happens in Israel does affect us all. This is not just a Jewish or just an Israeli problem. This is a problem for all humanity, for each and every one of us who believe in freedom and human rights. Learn more about what you can do at pjtn.org.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.